Hi, I'm Arthur, and today I want to talk about what it's like to exist as a trans person when your identification doesn't match your gender, and how to deal with situations that might arise because of that. So this is a video that I've thought about filming for a while because it's a situation that I've dealt with and that I think virtually every trans person has had to deal with at some point in time in their transition, or will have to deal with. But it's obviously not a coincidence that I'm choosing to film this video now, and it is unfortunate that I think that this video is particularly relevant. I wanted to start though with a fun fact that I'm going to reference again later in this video, which is, so in the United States, you have like a gender marker that's associated with your social security number and your social security card. People in the United States historically have been able to change their gender marker, especially in like the past decade or so. It's something that I've done. So the fun fact is, what demographic group is the most responsible for changes to the gender marker in their social security card in the United States? The answer, that might surprise you, is cisgender people. Rarely, but sometimes, there will be clerical errors when social security cards or any form of identification is being issued, and that the wrong gender marker will be put on someone's gender, someone's ID. And that happens to cisgender people. And though that is very rare, trans people are also very rare. I'm referring to a recent work in actually an economics paper that the authors estimate that about 2/3 of social security, gender marker on the social security card changes. I'm really fumbling my language there. But anyways, 2/3 of those are associated with like clerical errors for cisgender people, in that you don't see any name change. People keep like, it's like mark female to mark male, that sort of thing. All right, so keep that fun fact in the back of your mind, and now I'm going to hop into the main part of this video. So, what was it like for me? Well, a fact about me that generally affords me a good amount of privilege, but not always, is that I pass very well, and I started passing pretty quickly in my transition. So before I was on testosterone, I would sometimes pass like half the time, though often when I spoke, people would be a little like, it's weird for someone that seems to be in college to have a prepubescent voice. And then extremely quickly upon starting testosterone, my voice dropped, and then I basically started passing all the time. And then also quite quickly, it started to be that like, not just was I passing, but like it would be immensely confusing to people that I was transgender. And so, while obviously I feel like very fortunate for that, and I feel very lucky, that posed a lot of problems because I was much slower at getting my identification in order than I had expected. This was in part because I didn't think it was gonna go so quickly for me. I was like taken quite aback in a positive way by how my transition went. But also it was that like, even when it was much easier to change your identification to match your gender, it was nevertheless immensely difficult. Like, you had to get a lot of paperwork in order, you had to show up in person for things, you had to book appointments that would be months in advance. I remember having to announce my legal name change in a newspaper in Maine. And it was stuff that honestly, just as like a 22, 23-year-old, I struggled with the executive function on that. Like, it was just difficult for me. And so that meant that I existed for a couple years with the wrong identification while passing. And so I dealt with a lot of weird situations that would come up because people would be like, how the hell is that possible? The times that it would come up the most were getting carded. So I would show my ID, you know, if I was gonna buy liquor or go to sort of any 21 plus event. I obviously didn't look at all like my ID. So I'll pop up here what my ID photo used to look like. And it also came up in like doing financial stuff, actually. So when I had to go in person to a bank a few times, they thought I was committing fraud, and I had to be very assertive of like, no, this is me. So to be honest, I think the easiest way might be to have just said like, I'm transgender, I look different than I did before. That actually was not the approach I took. Despite being in a rather liberal area, I would instead just re-up and be like, that is me. Or I would say, yeah, my parents named me weird. That was actually what I said at the bank, and it worked, because my birth name is very feminine, and so it was just a very incongruent name. And lastly, it came up when I would travel with my passport. So my passport was one of the last things that I changed, and I did travel internationally once with the very wrong passport, which I will also flag up here. That also, again, caused some funny situations where people would just, I remember, because they care a lot more, like the guy at the liquor counter does not really care who you are and would like to just like go back to scrolling on his phone. You know, TSA cares more. And so they would at first tell me, this is not your passport. That would happen virtually every time when I would show it to someone. I would respond by saying, it is my passport. And sometimes they would just be like, oh, like I think that, I don't know in the background had they been given sort of some training on the existence of trans people, or whether they were just told to like, I don't know. But often without me needing to say that I was trans, as long as I confidently said, that is my passport, that was my photo, they would accept it. But then they would often volunteer a very weird remark, so they would say like, the funniest one was, I thought that was your beautiful girlfriend or something, or like, I got the girlfriend comment several times, and I was like, I don't know, is this like, this is the dream couple you've imagined, that girl and this guy? And I'm like, also, I think I was freshly 18, maybe 17 in that photo, so it's also like funny. I'm like, is it flattering to be told that that they thought I was hot enough to be dating a hot female version of myself? I don't know. Confusing mind games, and I don't know why people would say that, but they definitely would say that. It was awkward. Like, there was a time, so I was visiting my ex-boyfriend who lived in Germany, and back in that time you had to get like some sort of COVID certification because it was 2021 or 2021, yeah. And when he was going to like get that for me, they were like, this is not the same person. And then he did have to be very like, he is transgender, and like, you know, really dive into the explanation on all that. And you know, there were a few times where I had to be like, I'm transgender. And coming back into the US, it was quite difficult, because they looked at the photo, they looked at me, and they were like, this is not you. And I was like, it is me. And then she was like, I think I even said I was transgender, and I was like, it is me, I've just had physical changes. And she was like, like just really didn't believe it, because I had such a radical change in my appearance. And then they, you know, placed my face up close to the thing, and they looked at my eye, and they were like, oh, I guess it is you. And then they just let me back in. So all that to say, the common theme that's coming up here is that it is quite difficult to exist with a photo that does not match what you currently look like, and a name that does not match the gender that people are going to perceive you as. Those were the things that I hit like a lot of trouble in. I actually don't think it would have been too hard to have been generally traveling with an F marker. I don't think it would be terribly, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I would be upset if anything ever happened to revert my IDs back to the F marker, but I also think my quality of life would not be nearly as radically impacted as if I had to be existing with a photo of my face and what it looked like pre-transition, or with my old name. And so I bring that all up to say that the current state in the United States, as of filming this video in January of 2025, is that you can no longer change your gender marker on your passport or on your social security card or like any sort of federal level documentation. Again, I'm just a person, but I am a person with a vested interest. But from what I've seen, those of us who have already done those changes, they're not gonna like try to yank back our documents. That's like hard for them to do, they won't do that. But if I were to come up for renewal, it might be difficult, unclear. Luckily, my passport's getting renewed in 6 years or something like this, or 7 years, I don't know. But, so yeah, so federal documentation, they've announced that that's not going to happen anymore. In most states, you can still change your gender marker to match your actual gender, and the vast majority of time, that is the relevant documentation. I have only traveled internationally. I mean, I don't travel internationally that often. I've only done it a couple times, and so obviously it's great to have like the correct gender identification when that happens. But for the vast majority of my interactions, it is mostly relevant that my state ID match, and so I think that, again, my personal hunch is there's not a reason to be too concerned about that if your state is a blue or not like deep red state. And in some states they have changed that. But so what do you do if you are going to be traveling and your passport does not look like your old passport, or if you're in a state that doesn't let you change your gender marker? There is nothing preventing people from changing your photo to match your current appearance, or from like just getting a legal name change. Cis people get legal name changes. You can change your name to like Fish Turkey if you wanted to. Like, you're just allowed to change your name. Now I'm like, again, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but like, people change their names for all sorts of reasons and can change their names to all sorts of dumb things. As long as you do have to prove that you're not committing fraud and you're not doing it to like escape debts. But as long as that's the case, you can change your name. So, you know, if your documentation really currently does not look like you, you can update it and get a new photo. And if it is not, and if you have changed your name, you can legally change your name and you can update your documentation with your legal name change. Again, people do that. Like, I talked with my mom when I was doing all this because she legally changed her name when she got married, so it's not a thing specific to trans people at all. I think that the vast majority of difficult situations involving being, mismatched of sorts will go away if you change your photo to look correct and you change your name to look correct. Because then what you have is you do have a wrong gender marker, right? So that brings me back to my fun fact. Most people who are changing their gender marker at the federal level are cis people. It is extremely rare that they might put down the wrong gender marker, but trans people are also rare. So I think most people who are floating around in the wild with a state ID that has the wrong gender marker, it is because the person that was like typing in that number, or typing in that letter, made a clerical error. And so if everything else about you looks like totally correct and you just happen to have an F, I don't know that is... I like to think that that puts you in a pretty reasonable situation, or if you just happen to have an M if you're a trans woman. Potentially someone who, again, it's not their business, but like if a person at the liquor store sees that I have an F, they're just like, okay, weird, something probably went wrong. Because I think that people, as much attention as they would like to give to us, many cis people just don't know about trans people and have some preconception of us that is not correct. And so it will happen all the time that I'll have cis friends. Like I'm in a liberal area with people that like to think of themselves as like educated on trans issues or like care to care, And nevertheless, once some cis friends will get close to me, they'll ask me questions that reveal they just have no idea how this works. Like they know it's important, but they just truly have no idea. One of my good friends, who is a cisgender straight guy, told me that when he met me, he had no idea that I was transgender. And at this point, I was like, in my opinion, extremely clocky. Like some people were misgendering me at this point in time. I was like freshly on T. Some people were misgendering me at this point in time, some people were not. And so I felt like most people who like were correctly gendering me at least like knew I was trans, like they could, tell. He had no idea. And then when we were talking about stuff, he revealed that like upon having learned that I was trans, he assumed I must have transitioned a very long time ago. And it was just clear also in talking, like, people don't know like that you have to give yourself hormones all the time, or like how changes happen, or that there isn't one like magical surgery that changes you entirely. And especially people that have met you afterwards, like just like really don't get it. I've been in situations where like there's recently someone who who said that he thought, this happens quite frequently to me now, someone who said that when he heard I was a trans man, he assumed that person who called me a trans man, that I was non-binary but born male, and so it was like trans adjective, like man, but like male. Like people don't know. And this person is like a gay person, so it's like really no excuses, And so that's to say that I think that if you're progressing in your transition and you're generally passing and you show up at the club with an ID that has the right name, the right photo, and the wrong gender marker, the bouncer, first of all, is probably just looking at the date, but then second of all is just gonna like be like weird, weird that person has it, but not think that is a trans person. Probably, again, what can I say? So that's not to say that it doesn't like suck, but more just that there are steps that you can take to make this experience better for yourself. And if you're a person that's trans, that's early in your transition, and you're hearing about this news and you're like, oh my god, I'm so stressed, I wish I had done these legal changes earlier, I wish I had done it all. You still have the opportunity to move to a state where you can do all your legal changes at the state level. You still can change your name and your photo. You can do basically everything except the gender marker at the federal level, which comes up just when you're traveling like internationally and on background checks, which again, being trans comes up on my background checks anyways. So you can do a lot to make that situation better for yourself. All that being said, a fact that's just generally true, even as said, even before all this, is that it is hard to change your name. It's hard for cisgender people too. It's just like not a fun process. It involves a lot of paperwork. You have to like mail forms to your banks, and you have to like, it was a real headache. So I imagine some of you in the situation where you're like, okay, cool, but I still haven't done it. And it still might take you some time. And you're like, again, like worried about like, what is it gonna be like? Is it gonna be more difficult to exist as a trans person with the wrong documentation, in the Trump administration, etc. And I can't speak to that, but I can say that I think some tips that I'd heard from when I had the wrong identification back in the day, that I think can help make this experience easier for you. is to, if you're traveling somewhere where you're worried that you look really raw, like you look not like your photo, but you just got to do it, is that you can carry, you can ask your doctor to write a letter saying that you have done a gender transition. And so that's a nice thing to just carry on you, so that if someone's like, this doesn't look like you can say, here, I am a transgender, here is my doctor explaining what's happened. And similarly, some people talk about carrying your prescription for testosterone, like just a printed out form of your prescription, so that you can say, I am transgender, I am on testosterone, this is why I look different, here is my prescription. Those little steps can make it easier for the person to understand what's going on if you are in one of those situations, which again, I think is mostly coming up in travel. And I guess also in sort of financial situations as when it's come up for me. The other thing is that I did deal with some people that, like, when I was trying to change my passport, the person at the post office was like fairly obviously transphobic, and like did not want to process my application, even though there was literally nothing, like it was the Biden administration, I was doing all the right forms, like he was in the wrong. And I remember feeling very demoralized coming from that, because I was like, yeah, like I was feeling very frustrated. It ended up going through, it was fine. The vast majority of people, like I interacted with a lot of people with the wrong identification, and most people are transphobic. Like most people don't get trans people. There's a reason that, like, which again sucks, that it's politically viable to be scapegoating trans people right now. Nevertheless, like most people did not actively give me shit for it, because most people, like, most people are more lazy than they are transphobic. So you know, if you're, say, this happened to me, right, like when I was traveling around Europe, like I had to show identification to get on a bus for some reason. The bus driver maybe thinks trans people are crazy and would like yell at their kid if their kid was transgender. But is it like worth their time to cause a big fuss because they can tell that I'm transgender because my identification is that of a trans person? No, they like just want to get done with their shift. And that doesn't mean, again, like I had that like bad encounter, but I think that I had assumed that every encounter would be extremely difficult. And that's just often not the case, because often people like just can't be bothered to care enough. Or like, honestly, I think a lot of people, even in those situations, like didn't even necessarily put together I was trans, because they're just trying to like move on. And like, you know, like, again, like I think the person carding you at the liquor store, like, they're just like, okay, I see the birth date, like let's move on. The best thing to do in those situations is to try to make their lives easy, and that's how you can get out of them, is like be clear, be transparent, explain why you don't look like your ID, and often, but not always, that will help the situation. And I do think it's a case that, yeah, like one of the, I think, big things that's relevant is, yeah, like you might want to think more going forward about if you're traveling to a place that has anti-trans laws, or like where being trans is illegal or something, and you have mismatched ID, that, like, I wouldn't recommend that, and I think that's worth thinking about. But I think generally, you know, if you're traveling to a place where, you know, like when I was going to Germany, right, like where they know of trans people, and you just kind of have to out yourself. If you out yourself rather transparently, you can just like make the situation end and kind of move on. So that was my experience. It wasn't fun, I didn't like it, I did get through it. I think that another important thing to note in this day and age is that these changes to be able to legally change your gender identification, or just like your identification documents to have your gender match it, are rather recent. So I grew up in Maine, and prior to 2012, in many cases you had to actually get lower surgery in order to change your driver's license. And many trans people do not get lower surgery because it is especially then, wasn't really covered by insurance. You had to pay out of pocket like $100,000 to change your identification. It's particularly expensive for trans guys, and is like a multi-year, very complicated surgery, and also sterilizes you most of the time. And so basically, like in many states, again, even including my very liberal state, 1 decade ago, you had to sterilize yourself in order to change like your basic gender identification. And I think that many of my audience, myself included, are young people where, you know, it's like, oh my god, but 2012 was forever ago, right? Like if you're, you know, if you're someone who's in high school right now, oh god, I guess you were like, you were like a toddler in 2012, which is disturbing to think about. But 2012 is not that long ago, and there have been trans people that have been around forever. Trans people have been dealing with this, forever. There were trans people in 2012. And that's part of how I found, when because I was Googling this because I was under the impression, is I found forums of trans people talking about how much it sucked. But that is to say that, I think that there is something that I've had to reconcile myself, which is that I became aware of trans people when I was in high school, and something like 2014, 2015, I started to become more aware of trans people. And I myself transitioned in 2020, thought I was trans in 2019. I guess you could say I transitioned in 2019. Depends on where you draw the line. But, I transitioned 2019, 2020. And so this time feels very unprecedented to me. To my experience as a trans man, I'm like, whoa, very scared. This feels horrifying. And I feel, at times, pretty panicked. It is true that out of the time I have existed as a trans person, this is, I think, the worst political climate in the United States. But it is not true that in the, even slightly longer history of trans people, even if you just go back 1 decade before I came out, that this is unprecedented in some manner. The progress that trans activists have made in recent decades has been tremendous, and I think that's part of what facilitated people like me to realize that I was trans and to come out and to do those steps, is because the political climate was pretty, was on the up and was pretty good. And so there's been a lot of progress recently, but that doesn't mean that, in the time before that, there were not trans people, and that trans people were not surviving, and that trans people haven't, for, a very long time, had to wrestle with the government not recognizing their gender in various capacities. That's not to say that I'm not scared, and that's not to say that you shouldn't be scared, but that is to say that I think it's a time to lean more into community and to listen to trans elders who have been through that, to be proud of who we are and to not let the fear overcome us. Because that's part of the goal, right? Is they want us to be so scared that we retreat. Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about the kinds of videos and content that I want to make in this time, because I am, I was gonna say famously, except I'm not famous at all. I like to think of my channel as a positive channel, and one where I talk with a lens of hope. And that's not just because I think that, that's for a few reasons. It's that I think that is the right kind of content. That's the environment that I want to foster. That's the content I needed when I was a younger trans person. It's true, that being trans has hard parts. I knew that. I didn't really need to listen to yet another guy talking about how much transphobia sucks. I think I wanted to hear about, how good it could be, and so I film my videos with my younger self in mind, and with the kind of content that I think is I think I have a value in making the kind of content, and then also that it's good for me. I'm filming this video with my rather limited bandwidth, as someone who is I'm just so engrossed in my PhD work right now that, this is the limited sliver of free time for creative projects I have. And the last thing I want to do with that limited sliver of time is to work myself into a depressive spiral by talking about how much things suck. I find it very productive and special for myself to make videos that encourage the positive side of my brain. That's part of why I am so positive, is that I think it helps me. It makes me feel good, and it makes me more able to handle challenging times. So that's all to say that I just can't inspire myself to film doomy content, but I also don't want to be insensitive, and I don't want to claim that it isn't a scary time, and I don't want to be talking over people who are in worse situations. There was one video I filmed that was kind of trying to talk about how I think of these things, how I think of keeping a positive attitude while being scared about transphobia. That was one of the only videos I've filmed that I think rubbed a few people the wrong way. And so I've been a little I don't want to I don't know, I don't want you guys to like these videos. So anyways, I would be happy, and I might film more videos talking about how I think about self-preservation and how I think about staying grounded in these times. But I also, am keeping that balance in mind, and of course want to film tons of my standard content, of which I have several more videos already with notes jotted out about being trans in relationships and how to think about transition, and a lot of my more kind of classic content. But I felt very inspired to film this video today. I'm coming off conversations with various friends and with my parents about this time and about, what has changed but what hasn't changed. All right, so let me know in the comments what you're feeling and how I can be the most helpful in these scary times. All right.